Tonight, we uncover the story of a deity so mysterious, so powerful, that even the Vatican could not fully understand it. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent whose wisdom stretched across civilizations, whose teachings were hidden in codices, temples, and the very stars. Knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and medicine far beyond European understanding, preserved in secret, yet erased or rewritten to fit a narrative of faith. Explorers, missionaries, and scholars reported symbols, artifacts, and manuscripts they could not decipher, warnings buried in plain sight. Yet the Church remained silent. The serpent's wisdom was smuggled through centuries in secret societies, hidden carvings, and ritual practices, waiting for those daring enough to seek it. And those who came closest? Their discoveries vanished into Vatican vaults, lost to time, leaving only fragments of a truth too dangerous to be revealed. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Imagine a world long before the arrival of the Europeans, where vast cities rose from the jungle floor, adorned with pyramids that reached toward the heavens and temples filled with golden light. In this world, the people whispered of a being unlike any other, a god who walked among humans, teaching them the secrets of the stars, of medicine, and of the earth itself. They called him Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, a creature both human and divine, whose arrival was said to bring knowledge and balance to the world. Ancient manuscripts, carefully preserved on fragile bark and painted with colors that have survived centuries, speak of his descent, a moment when the skies opened and wisdom flowed down to the people like a river of light. These codices, hidden for centuries and fiercely guarded, describe his teachings not as simple commands from the heavens, but as lessons meant to awaken the mind, to inspire curiosity, and to ignite a desire for understanding that no empire or religion could suppress. The feathered serpent was more than a deity, more than a myth. He represented the bridge between the natural world and the mysteries of the cosmos, a living guide showing humans the path of knowledge. His eyes, according to legend, held the light of the stars, and his voice carried the rhythms of the universe itself. Those who encountered him, the texts insist, were forever changed, given insights that shaped agriculture, astronomy, and the way humans understood their place in the world. By the time the 15th century arrived, stories of Quetzalcoatl had begun to spread far beyond the central valleys of Mesoamerica, carried by travelers, priests, and scribes. Missionaries arriving in 1511 noted strange tales of a god with feathers and serpent scales, a being who could move between worlds, teaching civilizations that had achieved heights of knowledge that Europeans could not yet imagine. The Vatican itself received reports of these strange accounts, and while many dismissed them as superstition or exaggeration, the manuscripts spoke with a certainty that could not be ignored. They recorded not only his teachings, but the symbols he left behind, the glyphs carved into stone and painted on walls that seemed to encode wisdom about the cycles of the stars, the rise and fall of empires, and the flow of time itself. Quetzalcoatl was not a god of conquest or war. He was a teacher, a guide, a bringer of light in a world filled with shadow. The people remembered him in stories, in rituals, and in the careful carvings that survived the destruction of centuries. And even now, thousands of years later, when scholars and archaeologists unearth the pyramids and examine the codices, the mystery of the feathered serpent endures, whispering that knowledge was once shared freely, and that a single being, a bridge between humans and the divine, could alter the course of civilizations forever. Long before paper and ink were common in Europe, the people of Mesoamerica recorded their knowledge on delicate sheets of bark, folded like books, painted with colors that shone like sunlight through the canopy. These codices, created centuries before the arrival of the Spanish in 1492, were not mere decorations. They were manuals of life, charts of the stars, maps of the earth, and guides to human understanding. Each glyph, each intricate image, carried meaning layered in ways that only the initiated could comprehend. Yet, when the first missionaries arrived in 1500, they were baffled. They saw strange figures, serpents with feathers, humans entwined with animals, symbols for the sun and moon, yet could not grasp the logic or science behind them. The Vatican received reports of these codices, and scholars tried to interpret them using the frameworks they knew, applying European alphabets, Latin meanings, and Christian symbolism, but nothing fit. These texts were written in a system entirely different, one that connected mathematics with ritual, astronomy with agriculture, and morality with the cycles of time. The codices contained calendars that measured solar and lunar years with astonishing precision, far beyond what Europeans of the 15th century had mastered. They also depicted the movements of Venus, eclipses, and other celestial events in ways that could be tracked and predicted. The missionaries saw images of offerings, ceremonies, and rulers, yet failed to understand the purpose behind them. They assumed these were mere religious rituals, when in fact they encoded complex knowledge about seasons, weather, and the rise and fall of crops. Some codices even contained medical illustrations, diagrams showing plants, herbs, and treatments for injuries and illnesses that Europeans would not encounter for centuries. Each codex was a library of wisdom, yet its language remained locked, invisible to those who approached it, without the proper understanding. Scholars from the Vatican attempted to catalogue them, copying images, translating what they could, but much of the information was lost in the process. They replaced symbols with familiar words, imposed meanings that fit Christian teachings, and discarded what seemed incomprehensible. By the time 1510 arrived, many codices had been destroyed, burned, or hidden to prevent what was seen as heresy. The survivors, hidden in private collections or remote temples, whispered secrets of a world where knowledge was intertwined with spirituality, mathematics, and astronomy, in ways the Church could not fully explain. Today, when modern researchers examine these codices, they uncover traces of a science, a wisdom, and a vision of the world that challenges everything we thought we knew about pre-Columbian civilizations and the mysteries that the Feathered Serpent once shared with humanity. Long before the first Spanish ships sailed across the Atlantic, the Aztecs and Toltecs built cities that rivaled anything in Europe, not just in scale, but in sophistication. Their pyramids rose in precise alignment with the movements of the sun and moon, each stone laid with a purpose that spoke to an understanding of mathematics and geometry far beyond what Europeans of the 15th century imagined. Their knowledge of astronomy was particularly advanced. They measured the cycles of Venus and predicted solar eclipses with accuracy that would astonish modern scientists. Their calendars were not simple tools to mark days, but intricate systems that tracked time across centuries, weaving together agricultural cycles, religious observances, and celestial movements. Every festival, every ceremony corresponded to the stars, and every temple acted as a living observatory. Sacred geometry was embedded into the very design of their cities. Streets, plazas, and temples were arranged in patterns that echoed mathematical ratios, reflecting a deep awareness of harmony, balance, and proportion. This was knowledge not simply for decoration, but a deliberate mapping of the cosmos onto the Earth, connecting human life to the universe in ways that modern science is only beginning to understand. When European missionaries arrived in 1512, they saw grand cities like Tenochtitlan, teeming with life, adorned with canals and causeways. Yet, they could not comprehend the science embedded within them. They marveled at the gold, the art, and the ceremonies, but failed to recognize the depth of the knowledge that made such a civilization possible. The codices preserved fragments of this wisdom, showing the Toltecs teaching agriculture, medicine, and mathematics to their people. Diagrams illustrated the principles of balance and proportion, linking human construction to the stars and hinting at a philosophy where understanding the cosmos was part of daily life. The Spanish often dismissed these as superstition or idol worship, but the reality was far more remarkable. The Aztecs and Toltecs had created a society where art, science, and spirituality were inseparable. They had calculated the precise positions of the sun and planets, predicted eclipses, and understood seasonal shifts without telescopes, without mechanical clocks, relying solely on observation, patterns, and careful record keeping. For centuries, this civilization thrived, producing a body of knowledge that could have propelled Europe forward by centuries if it had been shared. Yet much of it was lost, destroyed, or hidden, leaving only traces of what was once a brilliant, sophisticated culture. When modern archaeologists study these ancient sites, the geometry of the pyramids, the alignments of the temples, and the mathematical precision of the codices reveal a truth that challenges everything we were taught about the so-called primitive Americas. The lost civilization of the Aztecs and Toltecs was not primitive at all. It was a beacon of knowledge, a society in harmony with the cosmos, and a reminder of what humanity can achieve when wisdom, observation, and imagination are combined. In 1512, the first Spanish ships arrived on the shores of Mesoamerica, bringing explorers, soldiers, and priests with them. They came seeking gold, glory, and the expansion of their faith. Yet, what they found was something that challenged everything they thought they knew. The cities they encountered were filled with towering pyramids, bustling markets, and people who had mastered agriculture, astronomy, and medicine in ways far beyond European understanding. Among the stories the priests recorded, one legend stood out more than any other. It was the tale of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who had once walked among humans, bringing wisdom and knowledge to the people. The Spaniards couldn't reconcile this figure with their own beliefs. How could a god, a teacher, and a guide exist outside the framework of Christendom? The missionaries saw statues, carvings, and glyphs depicting a creature with feathers and scales, holding staffs or scrolls, often surrounded by the sun and stars. They attempted to interpret these symbols through the lens of their own religion, but the meanings were unlike anything they had encountered. Reports were sent back to the Vatican in 1513, describing a world where knowledge, power, and spirituality were deeply intertwined, and a figure like Quetzalcoatl appeared to guide humans without the church. These letters expressed both fascination and confusion. Some suggested that the people were deceived by superstition, while others admitted that the wisdom in the codices, the calendars, and the astronomical records defied explanation. The arrival of Hernán Cortés and his forces added another layer of tension. As cities were taken and rulers were confronted, the priests tried to convert the indigenous people to Christianity. Yet, the stories of Quetzalcoatl persisted. Some elders even suggested that the white-skinned, bearded men from across the sea were the returning god himself, a notion that terrified and intrigued the Spanish. They struggled to suppress these ideas, writing their own chronicles that blended fact with fear and interpretation. Yet no account could fully erase the memory of the feathered serpent from the minds of those who still remembered. In 1515, missionaries began burning codices, destroying temples, and rewriting histories, attempting to fold the legend of Quetzalcoatl into Christian narratives. They imposed Latin prayers and teachings over the old ways, yet fragments remained. The geometry of the pyramids, the astronomical observations, and the medicinal knowledge carried echoes of a civilization whose wisdom could not be ignored. Even today, archaeologists and historians study these accounts, puzzled by the sophistication the Spaniards encountered and by the legends that persisted despite conquest. The arrival of the Europeans did not erase the legacy of the feathered serpent. Instead, it created a clash between worlds, a collision of knowledge and belief that left questions the Vatican itself couldn't fully answer, and a story of wisdom that continues to inspire and mystify. In 1513, letters began to arrive in Rome from distant lands across the Atlantic. Missionaries and explorers who had ventured into the heart of Mesoamerica reported astonishing sights. They described pyramids aligned with the stars, temples filled with gold, and symbols carved into stone that seemed to encode knowledge beyond human imagination. Among these reports, one story kept appearing, the tale of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent deity who had taught humans mathematics, medicine, and the movements of the heavens. Priests wrote in meticulous detail about the codices they had discovered, the painted bark books filled with complex glyphs and diagrams that no one in Europe could decipher. Some missionaries insisted the symbols contained astronomical charts that mapped the paths of Venus and the Moon. Others wrote that these codices held knowledge of herbs and remedies capable of healing illnesses that European doctors had long considered incurable. The letters painted a world alive with wisdom, a civilization whose achievements challenged everything the Church believed about civilization and divine guidance. In 1514, these reports were compiled and sent to the Vatican archives. Church authorities received them, yet many dismissed the accounts as exaggeration or superstition. Some argued that the indigenous peoples had invented tales of gods to explain the unknown. Others feared that acknowledging the depth of this knowledge might threaten the authority of the Church, a power that relied not only on faith, but on the control of information and history. Still, not all were content to ignore the manuscripts. Certain scholars in Rome tried to study the reports, comparing the symbols to classical texts, to the works of Pythagoras, and to ancient astronomy. Yet, the codices remained frustratingly opaque. Each glyph seemed to carry multiple meanings, some sacred, some practical, yet all beyond the comprehension of anyone not trained in the esoteric ways of the Mesoamerican priests. By 1515, missionaries continued to send objects, artifacts, and small statues representing Quetzalcoatl. The Vatican received these items, yet most were stored in private collections and never displayed, their significance quietly set aside. The feathered serpent became a symbol not of enlightenment, but of curiosity that had to be controlled. The Church maintained its silence in public while privately acknowledging the mystery, a strategy designed to prevent the spread of ideas that might challenge its narrative. Even today, historians examining these early correspondences note a tension between fascination and fear. The letters reveal glimpses of a civilization that understood the world in ways Europeans could not, and of a deity who had walked among humans, sharing knowledge freely. The Vatican received these reports, but in doing so, it also began a pattern of selective attention, choosing what to preserve, what to study, and what to ignore, setting the stage for centuries in which the feathered serpent would remain both a legend and a secret beyond the reach of ordinary eyes. Long ago, in a time before the Spanish arrived, the people of Mesoamerica spoke of a god who had walked among them, teaching the ways of the stars, the earth, and the human body. His name was Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, a creature both divine and human. According to legend, he did not remain forever. He promised the people that he would leave, not as an act of abandonment, but to return at a time when his teachings would again be needed. The stories of his departure were carefully recorded in codices and etched into stone on temple walls, pyramids, and altars. They depicted him ascending into the sky, feathers glinting in sunlight, serpent scales glimmering like the constellations he had taught humans to read. The symbolism of his flight was profound. It represented cycles of time, the passing of wisdom from one generation to the next, and the eternal promise that knowledge, once given, could never be destroyed. Temples built in his honor contained clues to celestial movements, designed so that shadows and light marked solstices and equinoxes with remarkable precision. Even today, archaeologists marvel at the alignment of structures like the Temple of Quetzalcoatl in Tula and the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan, realizing that these constructions were more than monuments. They were calendars, observatories, and libraries in stone. The flight of the serpent was also a lesson in trust and patience. Quetzalcoatl taught that wisdom must sometimes be hidden, preserved until humanity was ready to receive it fully. His departure was a safeguard against the misuse of knowledge, a way to ensure that his teachings would survive even the arrival of conquerors who could not yet comprehend their depth. Centuries later, when the Spanish arrived in 1512, priests and missionaries encountered symbols they could not explain. Serpents entwined with feathers, glyphs depicting cycles of stars, and depictions of gods walking among humans left them puzzled. They tried to impose European interpretations, calling the feathered serpent a false idol or a symbol of pagan superstition. Yet, some symbols persisted, carried secretly by local communities, hidden in plain sight within the architecture of new churches, in carvings, and in private manuscripts. Scholars now suggest that these symbols may have been part of a hidden network, preserved through secret societies and oral traditions, ensuring that the memory of Quetzalcoatl and his knowledge endured despite centuries of suppression. The flight of the serpent was more than a myth. It was a promise, a coded message, written in stone and memory that knowledge could not be lost, that the wisdom of the past could be safeguarded, and, when the time was right, returned to guide humanity once again. Even in the modern era, when researchers study the patterns, alignments, and hidden motifs across Mesoamerican ruins and European interpretations, the echo of Quetzalcoatl's flight remains, a testament to a deity who transcended time, whose teachings continue to challenge, inspire, and remind us that some truths cannot be erased, only hidden until the world is ready to see them. Long before modern communication connected continents, humans across the world created remarkably similar symbols, myths, and stories, often centered on serpent-like beings with feathers or wings. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl was revered as a teacher and guide, a feathered serpent who brought knowledge of the stars, the earth, and medicine. Further north on the Yucatan Peninsula, Kukulkan carried similar symbolism, the serpent descending from the heavens to impart wisdom to humans. These figures were not isolated legends. Across the Andes, the Nazca and Inca civilizations created serpent imagery in their geoglyphs and temple carvings, often linked to water, fertility, and cycles of time. In India, the Naga, serpentine beings with divine powers, were associated with knowledge, protection, and the flow of rivers. Temples and sculptures depicted these creatures as guardians of hidden wisdom, keeping knowledge safe for those who sought it. Even in Egypt, the uraeus, a rearing cobra, adorned the crowns of pharaohs, symbolizing sovereignty, protection, and divine insight. Across continents and millennia, a pattern emerges. The serpent, sometimes winged, sometimes feathered, is repeatedly linked to hidden knowledge, celestial understanding, and guidance for humanity. Scholars have long debated whether these similarities are coincidence, the result of a convergent thinking, or evidence of a lost global network of wisdom. Codices, stone carvings, and sacred texts suggest that ancient civilizations shared an understanding of the cosmos that transcended geography. The serpent was not merely an animal, but a symbol of transformation, intelligence, and connection between earth and sky. Missionaries and early European scholars struggled to comprehend this. When Spanish priests arrived in 1512, they encountered images of feathered serpents and attempted to label them as idolatry or superstition. They could not explain the repeated motifs appearing in places so far apart, nor could they reconcile the scientific and spiritual knowledge these symbols represented. Modern researchers examining archaeological evidence across Mesoamerica, South America, India, and Egypt note striking similarities in temple orientation, sacred geometry, and astronomical alignments. The serpent often marks the movement of stars, the cycles of the moon, or the solstices, suggesting a shared understanding of celestial patterns. Some theories propose that these civilizations, though separated by oceans and mountains, preserved fragments of an older, hidden knowledge, passed down in myths and rituals, encoded in stone, art, and oral traditions. Quetzalcoatl was not simply a local god. He fits into a broader narrative where the feathered serpent represents wisdom safeguarded across time and space. The echoes of these symbols across continents hint at a forgotten global memory, one that speaks to humanity's earliest attempts to understand the cosmos and preserve knowledge. These serpents challenge modern assumptions about isolated civilizations and suggest that long before recorded history, humans may have shared insights that were too profound for any one culture to contain alone. The patterns remain visible today for those who seek them, a silent testimony to the enduring reach of the feathered serpent and the hidden truths it represents. In 1513, as reports from the New World began reaching Rome, the Vatican showed a quiet but intense interest in the strange symbols, artifacts, and manuscripts arriving from Mesoamerica. Missionaries and explorers wrote about pyramids aligned with the stars, codices filled with glyphs that encoded astronomical and mathematical knowledge, and depictions of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who had brought wisdom to humans. These accounts were carefully collected and stored within the Vatican archives, yet the Church found itself unable to fully understand their meaning. The codices were written in languages unfamiliar to European scholars, combining pictographs, numbers, and images in ways that defied conventional logic. Reports described how the symbols represented cycles of Venus, solar eclipses, and agricultural calendars, precise enough to predict harvests years in advance. The manuscripts also contained images of human anatomy, medicinal herbs, and rituals linked to celestial events. Knowledge that suggested a sophistication far beyond anything Europe possessed at the time. Church officials debated how to approach these texts. Some argued that they should be destroyed, fearing that the knowledge could undermine Christian authority. Others insisted they should be preserved, believing that someday scholars might uncover their secrets. By 1515, the Vatican had amassed dozens of codices, small statues, and carvings. Yet comprehension remained elusive. Scholars sent from Rome attempted to translate the glyphs, applying Latin, Greek, and biblical frameworks, but the meaning continued to slip through their grasp. In 1516, letters between church officials reveal a mixture of awe and frustration. They acknowledge the precision and beauty of the artifacts, while expressing unease over the possibility that these objects contained knowledge independent of the church. Some writings hint at secretive study groups, tasked with observing the symbols, tracking their appearance in temples and temples' architecture, and recording any patterns that could be understood. Even centuries later, researchers find these Vatican records, showing careful attention to every feathered serpent, glyph, and celestial chart, yet no conclusive interpretation. It appears the Church recognized the importance of these symbols and the wisdom they represented, but lacked the tools, cultural context, and perhaps the willingness to grasp their full significance. Modern historians examining these documents see a subtle tension between control and curiosity. The Vatican sought to track, record, and archive the artifacts while keeping them inaccessible to the public. They preserved the codices and images in secrecy, understanding that their implications could challenge established narratives. The feathered serpent remained a mystery, simultaneously documented and obscured, a puzzle the Vatican could observe but could not fully decode. These records illustrate a church both intrigued and cautious, aware that the knowledge of Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, and other serpentine deities represented a world that predated Christian authority and held insights the Church had neither fully embraced nor dared to expose. The curiosity persisted, leaving an enduring question. What did the Vatican truly understand, and how much knowledge remains locked away, still undeciphered behind stone walls and guarded manuscripts? The codices of Mesoamerica are not merely books. They are windows into a world where knowledge, spirituality, and mathematics were inseparable. Each page, painted on bark or deer hide, holds intricate pictographs and glyphs that record cycles of the sun, moon, and planets with precision that European scholars of 1,513 could scarcely imagine. Some glyphs show the movement of Venus across the sky, the timing of eclipses, and the phases of the moon, all linked to agricultural cycles, ceremonies, and social events. The codices reveal that the people of this civilization understood time as something cyclical, a pattern repeating through generations, and that human activity must align with these celestial rhythms. Mathematical symbols appear alongside depictions of rituals and ceremonies, suggesting calculations used to predict seasons, to chart crops, and even to organize cities. One codex describes a series of interlocking circles representing planetary cycles, a concept that would not reach Europe until centuries later with the discoveries of Kepler and Galileo. Missionaries arriving in the New World were astounded and bewildered. They saw images of gods, serpents, and humans intertwined with geometric patterns, but could not interpret their meaning. They attempted to translate the symbols using Latin and biblical references, yet the codices resisted all such attempts. Letters sent to the Vatican in 1514 reveal both fascination and frustration. Scholars acknowledged the sophistication of the mathematical and astronomical content, while simultaneously labeling it pagan superstition. They could not reconcile a civilization possessing calendars, measurements, and observatories with the idea that knowledge only came from European learning. Many codices also include detailed diagrams of the stars, showing constellations aligned with temples and pyramids, demonstrating a precise understanding of the heavens. Agricultural charts reveal knowledge of planting and harvesting cycles timed with celestial events, and other glyphs indicate advanced counting systems, including place value and zero, concepts that Europe would only formally adopt centuries later. The codices suggest that mathematics was not abstract, but deeply practical, applied to daily life, spiritual practice, and long-term planning. For the Church, these texts presented both intrigue and danger. They contained knowledge that could challenge European authority, and yet they also offered insight into civilizations older and more advanced than anyone had imagined. Some codices were hidden, preserved secretly within monasteries or collections, their meaning only partially understood even by those tasked with guarding them. Today, scholars continue to study these texts, uncovering traces of astronomical calculations, cycles of time, and advanced mathematics that reveal a world where knowledge was both sacred and scientific. The codices remain a testament to human ingenuity, a record of wisdom that transcended continents, a mystery that continues to challenge our understanding of history and the intelligence of the civilizations that came before. In 1513, Franciscan and Jesuit monks arrived in Mexico with a mission not only to convert the indigenous peoples, but to understand the world they had entered. They found themselves surrounded by pyramids, temples, and codices filled with symbols and stories that defied European logic. Among the most puzzling and fascinating was the legend of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who had taught humans astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and spirituality. The monks set to work translating the codices, carefully copying the pictographs and attempting to map them onto the frameworks of Latin and Christian doctrine. They quickly discovered that the texts revealed knowledge that had been deliberately encoded, knowledge that connected the movements of Venus, lunar cycles, and the solar year with rituals and social order. These insights went far beyond mere superstition. The codices recorded agricultural cycles, medical treatments, and mathematical principles that were centuries ahead of European understanding. As the monks progressed, however, they faced a dilemma. The codices presented Quetzalcoatl not as a deity to be conquered by the Christian god, but as a teacher whose wisdom rivaled anything found in Europe. To reconcile this with Catholic doctrine, some passages were altered or suppressed. Descriptions of the serpent deity's role in educating humanity were rewritten to emphasize divine providence from the Christian god, rather than human or divine initiative within Mesoamerican belief systems. Reports from 1514 indicate that certain codices were hidden or partially destroyed to prevent what the Church considered heretical interpretations. Yet the monks who worked on these translations often left marginal notes, hints of the original meanings. Fragments that suggested the true wisdom of Quetzalcoatl could still be traced. They recorded measurements of temple alignments, astronomical observations, and ceremonial timings that showed a level of sophistication the Church struggled to explain or accept. In 1515, letters sent to Rome reveal both excitement and concern. Scholars at the Vatican marveled at the precision of the calculations and the complexity of the pictographs. Yet they worried that if left intact, the teachings of Quetzalcoatl might inspire independent thought or question the authority of the Church. The monks became both translators and censors, preserving knowledge while reshaping it to fit a narrative that could coexist with Catholic teaching. Centuries later, researchers examining these manuscripts uncover traces of the original content. Detailed calendars, maps of the stars, and philosophical teachings hidden beneath layers of editorial intervention. The work of these Franciscan and Jesuit monks shows a careful balance between fascination and control, a tension that allowed fragments of Quetzalcoatl's wisdom to survive, while ensuring that the Church maintained authority over interpretation. These manuscripts, edited but preserved, remain among the most compelling evidence of a civilization whose knowledge was too profound to be entirely lost, yet too dangerous to be fully revealed at the time. Across Europe, in the quiet corridors of monasteries and behind the locked doors of royal libraries, rumors persisted of manuscripts brought from the New World that contained knowledge the Church had chosen to guard carefully. Among these hidden texts, scholars and missionaries whispered of codices detailing the teachings of Quetzalcoatl, the Feathered Serpent deity of Mesoamerica. These manuscripts, it is said, were more than records of myth or legend. They contained astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and philosophy, knowledge that could connect civilizations separated by oceans and centuries. In 1515, letters from Spanish missionaries indicate that some codices were sent to Spain, presented to the Vatican, and then quietly removed from public view. They were catalogued, stored, and in some cases rewritten to align with Catholic doctrine, yet hints of their original content remained visible in margin notes, sketches, and partial translations. These manuscripts were not merely curiosities. They represented a bridge between worlds, a thread connecting the wisdom of Mesoamerican civilizations with the broader history of humanity. Reports suggest that the codices contained star charts aligned with European and Mesoamerican calendars, diagrams of sacred geometry, and philosophical teachings emphasizing harmony, balance, and the cycles of time. Such knowledge challenged the European understanding of history and science, and the Church recognized the potential danger in allowing it to circulate freely. In 1516, correspondence between Vatican scholars and local bishops reveals a careful strategy. Some manuscripts were placed in restricted collections, accessible only to a few trusted clerics. Others were hidden away entirely, preserved in secret archives whose existence was known to only a handful of people. Over the centuries, these texts may have influenced European thought quietly, filtered through selective translation and study, yet their full teachings remained obscured. Historians today speculate that within these hidden archives lie insights about Quetzalcoatl's role as a teacher, a guide whose knowledge was not limited to one civilization, but offered principles that could unite disparate cultures. The codices might explain how astronomy, mathematics, and spiritual understanding traveled across continents long before global exploration became commonplace. The secrecy surrounding these manuscripts has fueled curiosity for generations. Scholars have long debated what was lost, what was preserved, and what the Vatican continues to guard. Some claim that entire libraries were quietly removed from circulation to prevent knowledge from upsetting established religious or political structures. Evidence suggests that the teachings of Quetzalcoatl, carefully hidden and altered over centuries, could reveal a profound understanding of humanity's place in the cosmos, a wisdom shared across civilizations, yet deliberately kept from public view. The hidden archives of Europe, filled with codices, manuscripts, and obscure writings, remain a silent testimony to a history that was preserved, controlled, and partially erased. Within those stone walls and carefully catalogued shelves, the wisdom of the Feathered Serpent waits, a bridge between worlds, waiting for those who are willing to uncover it. Across the valleys and highlands of Mesoamerica, temple ruins and pyramids rise like silent sentinels, each stone carefully placed with a purpose that reaches far beyond decoration. The Spanish conquerors who arrived in 1512 were struck by their scale and beauty, yet they could not comprehend the knowledge embedded within them. Carvings on walls, etched into stone with painstaking precision, depicted serpents, stars, planets, and humans moving in alignment with celestial patterns. The codices had hinted at astronomical knowledge, but the temples themselves were living, monumental charts of the sky. Priests and soldiers reported that certain pyramids cast shadows in perfect alignment with the solstices, and on the equinox, sunlight would illuminate staircases or altars in ways that suggested an understanding of geometry and the movement of the heavens that far exceeded anything in Europe. In 1513, missionaries wrote letters describing these patterns, attempting to translate their meaning into Latin and Christian doctrine, but the symbols resisted interpretation. The feathered serpent appeared again, carved in stone alongside diagrams that seemed to map the paths of Venus and the moon. Observations suggested that the people of Mesoamerica could predict eclipses and other celestial events with astonishing accuracy. Yet the Spanish and Vatican scholars could not replicate the calculations. Temples were designed as observatories, pyramids as calendars, and carvings as lessons in mathematics, astronomy, and sacred cycles. Even subtle features, such as the spacing of steps or the angle of a doorway, encoded measurements tied to solar and lunar cycles. The ruins were not just architecture. They were textbooks written in stone, designed to preserve knowledge for generations. Over time, many of these sites were damaged or altered by European intervention, yet the patterns remain visible to this day. archaeologists studying Teotihuacan, Tula, and Chichen Itza have uncovered alignments and carvings that continue to puzzle modern scientists, confirming what early observers had suspected. The civilization possessed knowledge far beyond what contemporary Europe could imagine. Letters preserved in Vatican archives reveal attempts to copy diagrams, measure angles, and understand how these structures functioned. Yet even the most learned scholars could not unlock their full meaning. The carvings suggested a world where time, stars, and human activity were deeply intertwined, and the feathered serpent often served as a guide to reading these cosmic codes. Today, when researchers stand among these pyramids and gaze at the carvings, they see the same mystery that baffled the Spanish and Vatican scholars centuries ago. The stones whisper of a civilization that understood the heavens, recorded their discoveries in monumental architecture, and encoded wisdom meant to endure beyond the reach of conquest. Symbols in stone remain a testament to this knowledge, evidence that human understanding of the cosmos has existed long before modern science, and that the legacy of the feathered serpent endures in the silent, precise language of carved rock. Long before telescopes and modern astronomy, the people of Mesoamerica observed the heavens with extraordinary precision. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was not only a deity of wisdom and learning, but also a guide to understanding the cosmos. Ancient manuscripts and codices describe his teachings in terms that connect the movement of the stars, the solstices, and the cycles of the moon to human activity, agriculture, and sacred rituals. Missionaries arriving in 1512 noted the precision with which temples and pyramids were aligned, often pointing towards solstices or significant constellations. Observers recorded that on the day of the equinox, sunlight would fall perfectly along the steps of pyramids, illuminating carvings of serpents and celestial symbols. Scholars now believe these alignments were intentional, designed to mark important astronomical events and to encode the knowledge of cycles that guided society. Codices contain illustrations showing Quetzalcoatl intertwined with stars, suggesting he acted as both teacher and celestial navigator, connecting humanity to the heavens. The cycles of Venus, one of the most important planets in Mesoamerican astronomy, are referenced repeatedly. The codices indicate that Quetzalcoatl's movements were tied to the rising and setting of Venus, helping predict solar and lunar eclipses and guiding agricultural planning. Missionaries sent letters to Rome in 1513 describing these connections, yet European scholars struggled to interpret the glyphs. They could not see the correlation between the myths and the night sky, and the Church, wary of anything that might rival its own authority, often dismissed these observations as superstition. In 1514, some codices were hidden or censored, preserving only partial records of this astronomical knowledge. Yet traces remain in temple alignments and stone carvings. The Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan, for example, is oriented to align with the zenith of the sun on specific days, while the Pyramid of Kukulkan in Chichen Itza casts shadows that create the image of a serpent descending the steps during the equinox. These constructions are living evidence of Quetzalcoatl's teachings, combining mathematics, observation, and ritual into a coherent system. Scholars studying these sites today note that the precision suggests knowledge of the solar year, lunar months, and planetary movements that rivaled early European astronomy. Quetzalcoatl was not simply a mythological figure. he embodied an understanding of the sky, teaching humans to read the stars, calculate time, and integrate celestial events into daily life. The connections between the myths, the codices, and the architecture reveal a civilization deeply aware of the universe's patterns, using the feathered serpent as a guide and symbol for this knowledge. Even centuries later, these alignments continue to awe modern researchers, showing that the Mesoamericans, guided by the wisdom of Quetzalcoatl, achieved a level of astronomical understanding that challenges conventional ideas about ancient science and demonstrates a civilization attuned to the rhythms of the cosmos. In the codices and stone carvings of Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent often coils in a circle, a powerful symbol of cycles, renewal, and the endless flow of time. Quetzalcoatl's form itself teaches that time is not linear, but cyclical, repeating in patterns that govern seasons, celestial movements, and human life. The serpent devours its own tail or curves around celestial charts, representing beginnings and endings that are intertwined. This understanding of time as a cycle echoes in ways that seem eerily connected to later European manipulations of history and calendars. When the Spanish arrived in 1512, they carried with them the Julian calendar, an imperfect system that had already been slightly misaligned with the solar year. Centuries later, in 1582, Pope Gregory III introduced the Gregorian calendar, a reform designed to correct errors and to centralize control over the measurement of time. The Vatican's control of calendars allowed them to dictate the official flow of history, determine the dates of feasts, and establish the rhythm of society according to church authority. Much like the cyclical serpent of Mesoamerican belief, the Church recognized that controlling the perception of time gave power over memory and narrative. Missionaries who studied codices noted the serpent's coil, the repetition of celestial events, and the alignment of rituals with these cycles. Yet European observers often failed to grasp the deeper meaning. The feathered serpent's cycles were more than symbolic. They guided planting, harvesting, ceremonies, and political decisions, creating a framework where events repeated and knowledge was passed through generations. In a similar way, the Vatican used the calendar to shape the story of human history, determining which events were emphasized, which years were recognized, and which were left in obscurity. Letters from 1515 show that scholars in Rome were fascinated by the cyclical knowledge embedded in Mesoamerican structures and codices, but they struggled to reconcile it with the Christian concept of linear time, a beginning and an end dictated by Scripture. The serpent teaches that time belongs to cycles, yet the Church sought to control the sequence of history, creating a narrative where authority appears eternal and uninterrupted. Scholars have speculated that the combination of celestial observation and symbolic storytelling in the codices served as a method to preserve knowledge against forces that might manipulate historical memory. The feathered serpent encodes time in coils, symbols, and patterns, teaching that the past, present, and future are connected. Similarly, the Vatican, through calendars, archives, and selective recording of events, shaped the flow of European history, determining what would be remembered and what would be hidden. The parallel is striking. Both systems recognize that time is power. By understanding cycles, whether through serpents or calendars, civilizations can preserve knowledge, control societies, and guide humanity's perception of reality. The feathered serpent's message is clear. Time is neither lost nor absolute. It is observed, measured, and interpreted. And those who control that interpretation control the story of the world itself. Long before the Spanish arrived in Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl was said to walk among humans, teaching knowledge that would shape the civilization for generations. Codices and oral traditions describe him as a master of mathematics, able to calculate complex cycles of the sun, moon, and planets with precision that astonished European missionaries when they first arrived in 1512. Villagers and priests recalled that Quetzalcoatl instructed them in counting, measuring, and predicting celestial events, lessons that guided the planting of crops, the timing of festivals, and the construction of temples aligned with the stars. Agriculture, medicine, and science were intertwined in his teachings. Fields were mapped according to the cycles of the sun, irrigation systems built to channel water efficiently, and crop rotations designed to maintain soil fertility over decades. The codices contain diagrams of terraces, canals, and water management systems that reveal a sophisticated understanding of hydrology and environmental planning. European scholars in 1513 could not comprehend how these techniques allowed civilizations to thrive in climates that would have challenged any contemporary European society. Beyond farming, Quetzalcoatl's knowledge extended to medicine. The codices show treatments using herbs, roots, and minerals to cure diseases that confounded European doctors at the time. Some texts describe surgical procedures and healing rituals tied to celestial cycles, indicating a deep integration of astronomy and human biology. Missionaries sent reports to Rome in 1514, noting their awe and confusion. They could see the precision, logic, and practicality in these teachings, yet they were unable to replicate or fully understand them. Often, the Church attempted to reinterpret the knowledge to fit Christian doctrine, erasing references to Quetzalcoatl's direct influence, and reframing the wisdom as divinely inspired in a way that aligned with European beliefs. Scholars in the Vatican were intrigued, but cautious, recognizing that the civilization possessed a level of understanding Europe had not yet reached. Some codices were hidden, altered, or preserved only for private study, ensuring that the full extent of the Serpent's teachings would not become widely known. Modern researchers studying these codices are still amazed by the scope of Quetzalcoatl's knowledge. Mathematical calculations for calendars, agricultural cycles, and astronomical events reveal a sophistication far ahead of 15th century Europe. Medicinal texts show a nuanced understanding of the human body and natural remedies that would not appear in European texts for centuries. The Feathered Serpent, it seems, was not a mere deity of myth, but a teacher whose wisdom encompassed multiple disciplines, a guide for practical and cosmic knowledge alike. His legacy demonstrates that civilizations across the world possess deep insights into the natural and celestial world, and that when Europeans arrived, they encountered a level of science, mathematics, and medicine that challenged their assumptions about human capability and the origins of knowledge itself. When the Spanish missionaries arrived in Mesoamerica in 1512, they were met with a world rich in symbols, stories, and deities unlike anything they had encountered in Europe. Central among these was Quetzalcoatl, the Feathered Serpent, whose teachings permeated temples, codices, and daily life. Missionaries sought to convert the indigenous peoples to Christianity, but the task proved far more complex than simply teaching prayers and rituals. The serpent deity was deeply woven into the culture, guiding mathematics, agriculture, astronomy, and moral teachings. Missionaries recorded their attempts to interpret these beliefs, often misunderstanding them entirely. They saw Quetzalcoatl as a god to be supplanted by the Christian god, a figure of pagan superstition that needed correction or eradication. Letters sent to Rome in 1513 reveal frustration, astonishment, and fear. Some missionaries attempted to reinterpret the serpent's teachings, framing Quetzalcoatl as a prophet or angel within a Christian context, while others erased his presence entirely from translated codices. The Church recognized that acknowledging the depth and the scope of the indigenous knowledge could challenge its authority. Quetzalcoatl's role as a teacher of mathematics, astronomy, and medicine was particularly troubling, for it demonstrated that advanced understanding could exist outside the Church's control. Missionaries began a process of selective suppression, editing codices and rewriting narratives to emphasize Christian superiority. Temples were destroyed or repurposed, stone carvings defaced, and rituals replaced with mass, prayers, and saints. In some cases, the indigenous communities preserved fragments of the old teachings in secret, passing knowledge orally or encoding it in private ceremonies. Despite the Church's efforts, traces of Quetzalcoatl persisted, hiding in plain sight in architectural designs, geometric patterns, and the alignment of buildings with celestial events. Some codices survived, carefully hidden by local priests or laypeople, revealing the depth of a culture that had understood cycles of the sun, moon, and planets with precision. In 1514, reports indicate that the Vatican received these translations and suppressions with interest. Scholars noted the recurring serpent symbols and star charts, but struggled to interpret them within a European framework. Fear of heresy and the desire to maintain doctrinal control ensured that the knowledge was never fully published or explained. The encounters between missionaries and Quetzalcoatl's teachings became a battle not only of faith, but of understanding. Every attempt to Christianize the indigenous belief system risked losing the wisdom encoded in centuries of observation, mathematics, and philosophy. Modern researchers studying surviving codices and temple ruins see the tension between preservation and suppression. The Church, in its effort to control interpretation, inadvertently created a layered record, a mixture of altered teachings, suppressed knowledge, and hidden truths. These encounters reveal that Quetzalcoatl's influence did not vanish entirely. It adapted, survived, and waited, quietly informing later generations, while the missionaries believed they had replaced the old with the new. The Feathered Serpent's wisdom endured, hidden beneath the surface of imposed doctrine, challenging assumptions about knowledge, power, and cultural erasure. In the heart of Europe, hidden behind locked doors and heavy stone walls, there existed manuscripts that were never meant for public eyes. These texts contained knowledge older than the Church itself, teachings that did not rely on Christian authority, and yet held profound wisdom. Among them were codices and scrolls describing the cycles of the stars, the secrets of the human body, advanced agricultural techniques, and the philosophical insights of civilizations that predated the spread of Christianity. Missionaries and Vatican scholars in 1514 encountered some of these texts brought from the New World, revealing the wisdom of Quetzalcoatl, and other ancient teachers. To the Church, these manuscripts were dangerous. They challenged the monopoly over truth, suggesting that knowledge could exist outside the sanctioned teachings of priests and popes. Letters from 1515 describe debates among scholars about how to handle these writings. Some argued for preservation, fearing that destroying such knowledge would be a crime against history. Others insisted that any text not aligned with Christian doctrine must be hidden or destroyed to prevent heresy. The codices often contained information that European scholars could not verify. They described astronomical phenomena with precision, recorded medicinal recipes and treatments unknown in Europe, and presented mathematical calculations that exceeded contemporary understanding. These manuscripts implied that human beings had developed sophisticated knowledge independently, a concept that unsettled church authorities who relied on the perception that wisdom flowed from divine instruction alone. In 1516, documents indicate that several codices were catalogued and locked away in secret collections, accessible only to a select few clerics. The texts were preserved, but their full meaning was obscured, rewritten in parts or annotated with warnings about heretical content. Many codices were deliberately altered, erasing references to the teachers and civilizations that produced them, while retaining the practical knowledge in a form that could be tolerated. Centuries later, scholars examining these archives find hints of forbidden wisdom hidden in marginal notes, coded illustrations, and fragmented translations. The manuscripts reveal that civilizations in Mesoamerica, South America, and elsewhere understood time, astronomy, agriculture, and human anatomy in ways that rival or surpass European knowledge of the 15th century. The Church's intervention ensured that this wisdom was never fully integrated into mainstream education or practice. Yet the texts survived, whispering truths that had been too powerful to erase entirely. The story of these manuscripts illustrates the tension between control and knowledge, faith and reason, authority and discovery. Forbidden wisdom was preserved not to enlighten humanity, but to contain it, showing that sometimes the most valuable truths are hidden not because they are false, but because they are too independent to coexist with established power. These texts remain a reminder that history is often shaped by those who hold the keys to knowledge, and that the past contains truths the world has only glimpsed through cracks in the archives. Long after the Spanish conquest and the initial suppression of indigenous knowledge, whispers persisted of secret groups dedicated to preserving the teachings of Quetzalcoatl. These clandestine societies moved quietly, meeting in hidden chambers, remote temples, and beneath the canopy of dense forests. Missionaries and church authorities remained largely unaware of their existence, for these sects operated with extreme discretion, passing knowledge from one generation to the next in coded language, symbolic rituals, and oral traditions. Accounts from 1650 describe gatherings where elders taught astronomy, mathematics, agriculture, and spiritual philosophy, under the guise of ceremonial dance, music, or artistic expression. The Feathered Serpent remained at the heart of their teachings, not as a god to worship, but as a guide to understanding the universe and human potential. Observers noted that the rituals often corresponded with celestial events. Certain ceremonies occurred at the solstices or during the appearance of Venus, echoing the lessons preserved in ancient codices. These practices allowed the hidden societies to maintain continuity with the knowledge of Quetzalcoatl, ensuring that the wisdom of cycles, celestial patterns, and sacred geometry survived despite centuries of church suppression. In the 18th century, reports from European travelers hint at groups using symbols of serpents, feathers, and spirals in secretive artworks, carvings, and manuscripts, often tucked away in remote monasteries or private homes. Some scholars believe these symbols encoded instructions for advanced agricultural techniques, astronomical calculations, and medicinal practices, preserving what could have been lost forever. The sects were careful to avoid direct confrontation with the church. They understood that visibility invited persecution, yet secrecy did not prevent them from safeguarding the teachings. In some regions, apprentices learned by shadowing elders in the fields, observing the alignment of crops with the sun and stars, or by watching ritual performances that concealed complex mathematical patterns within song and movement. The societies thrived quietly, adapting over centuries while keeping the essence of Quetzalcoatl's wisdom intact. These networks may have influenced early Enlightenment thinkers indirectly, seeding knowledge of the natural world, cycles, and astronomy without revealing their true origins. Modern researchers have uncovered traces of these secret practices in obscure manuscripts, hidden architectural motifs, and oral traditions preserved by indigenous communities. The evidence suggests that while the church controlled official knowledge, an underground current of learning persisted, guided by the principles of the Feathered Serpent. These secret societies ensured that the wisdom of Quetzalcoatl was not lost entirely, operating in the shadows to protect knowledge too dangerous or powerful to be revealed openly. Their story reminds us that even in eras of suppression, the human drive to understand, to measure, and to preserve truth finds a way, often hidden in plain sight, silently ensuring that the light of ancient knowledge continues to flicker through time. In 1513, reports of newly discovered lands across the Atlantic reached Europe, carrying not only tales of gold and conquest, but also hints of knowledge far older than the voyages themselves. Maps sent from explorers and missionaries depicted coastlines, rivers, and cities with a precision that seemed almost impossible for the time. Some of these maps found their way into the hands of the Vatican, where they were carefully catalogued, analysed, and then placed in secure vaults, inaccessible to the public. Scholars examining these documents centuries later discovered symbols and notations suggesting that knowledge had travelled from the Americas to Europe, encoded in a way that preserved Mesoamerican understanding without revealing its source. Certain maps contain drawings of serpents, spirals, and celestial alignments that echo the teachings of Quetzalcoatl, hinting at a transfer of astronomical and mathematical wisdom alongside geographical knowledge. The precision of these maps was astonishing. Coastlines of Central and South America were depicted with remarkable accuracy. Rivers were charted in detail, and the relative positions of mountains, valleys, and settlements matched observations made decades later by explorers with modern tools. Letters sent to the Vatican in 1515 reveal intrigue and confusion among church officials. Scholars recognized the sophistication of the maps, yet struggled to explain how Europeans could have obtained such precise information so soon after first contact. In some cases, symbols appeared that suggested a connection to codices and temple alignments, implying that the knowledge of the Feathered Serpent had influenced the mapping process. The maps themselves became tools of secrecy, access was limited, and notes were added in Latin to obscure the origin of the information. Certain symbols, once understood by Mesoamerican priests, were hidden behind European annotations, making it nearly impossible for outsiders to decipher the original meaning. Modern researchers analyzing these maps in the Vatican archives notice patterns that suggest a deliberate effort to preserve the wisdom of the Americas while keeping it under control. Astronomical symbols, encoded distances, and geometric patterns appear repeatedly, revealing that the creators of the maps understood more than just geography. They understood the cycles of time, celestial movements, and sacred measurements of the Earth itself. The connection to Quetzalcoatl is unmistakable. The serpent appears in spirals, in the alignment of coastal lines, and in diagrams that correspond to star charts, echoing the teachings hidden in codices and temple ruins. These maps suggest that knowledge flowed across continents, carefully recorded and stored in secrecy. The Vatican, aware of the implications, kept these documents locked, ensuring that the wisdom of the Americas could influence Europe only under the Church's supervision. Symbols in Vatican maps tell a story of hidden connections, a silent transfer of knowledge from one world to another, and the enduring legacy of the Feathered Serpent, waiting for those who are willing to look beyond the surface and recognize the truths concealed within the folds of parchment and ink. When Spanish missionaries first encountered the legends of Quetzalcoatl in 1512, they were fascinated and unsettled at the same time. Here was a deity who had taught advanced mathematics, astronomy, and medicine to the peoples of Mesoamerica, knowledge that Europe had not yet discovered. The codices and temple inscriptions painted a picture of civilizations that were sophisticated, organized, and deeply connected to the stars. The Church, upon receiving reports of these discoveries in 1514, chose silence. Acknowledging Quetzalcoatl and the knowledge he represented risked undermining the narrative that Europe was the center of learning, and that wisdom flowed from divine authority through the Church. Letters from Vatican scholars of the time reveal cautious curiosity, but also fear. They recognized that these civilizations had developed complex calendars, precise astronomical calculations, and advanced agricultural systems without European guidance. To admit this openly would challenge the doctrine that all knowledge worthy of humanity originated under God's instruction as interpreted by the clergy. Silence became a strategy. Codices were hidden. Manuscripts stored in secret archives, and temple observations ignored or dismissed in official reports. Missionaries and scholars were instructed to reinterpret or downplay references to Quetzalcoatl, framing the teachings as pagan superstition or divine intervention rather than genuine human achievement. The Church's concern was not only doctrinal, but also political. To concede that the Americas had independent civilizations with knowledge equal or superior to Europe could weaken authority over both European subjects and colonial territories. By controlling what could be taught, what could be recorded, and what could be remembered, the Vatican ensured that its image as the ultimate source of wisdom remained unchallenged. Over the decades, the pattern continued. Codices were recopied, altered, or restricted to private study, and any references to Quetzalcoatl were either erased or reframed in Christian terms. Missionaries' diaries reveal frustration as they struggled to reconcile the sophistication they witnessed with the Church's insistence on silence. Even when elements of this knowledge were slowly integrated into European science and agriculture, the origin was obscured, often attributed to divine inspiration or rediscovery, rather than transmission from Mesoamerican civilizations. Modern scholars examining these archives see evidence of this careful suppression. Marginal notes, redactions, and selective preservation point to a deliberate choice to control information, shaping the narrative to fit the image of a Europe that had always been the pinnacle of learning. The silence of the Church ensured that generations of Europeans never fully understood the achievements of the peoples Quetzalcoatl had guided. Knowledge that could have shifted perspectives on history, science, and human capability remained locked behind stone walls and Latin translations. By avoiding acknowledgement, the Vatican preserved the perception of its authority, demonstrating that control over truth is as powerful as control over territory or wealth. The hidden legacy of Quetzalcoatl's teachings reminds us that what is not said can be as influential as what is proclaimed, and that the power to define knowledge often rests in silence. When the Spanish first arrived in Mesoamerica in 1512, they were struck not only by the grandeur of the cities, but also by the vast collection of codices, manuscripts, and carved inscriptions that documented centuries of indigenous knowledge. These texts recorded astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and philosophy developed independently of Europe. Missionaries and church authorities quickly recognized that allowing this knowledge to circulate freely could challenge their authority. Over the following decades, systematic efforts began to suppress, alter, or destroy these works. Codices were selectively copied, with sections deemed dangerous, heretical, or contradictory to Christian teachings left out. Letters from 1515 describe clerics carefully reviewing manuscripts and striking passages that revealed Quetzalcoatl's teachings or advanced understanding of the cosmos. Original codices were often hidden away in monasteries, private collections, or vaults in Spain, making them inaccessible to the public. In some cases, entire libraries were burned to prevent the spread of knowledge, while in others, texts were rewritten to align with church doctrine. The process was not always violent. Monks and scribes copied manuscripts under supervision, erasing certain concepts and emphasizing others, so that what survived could be presented as harmless or religiously appropriate. Observers recorded that these edits often included inserting biblical allegories, changing references to deities, and reframing practical instructions as miracles or divine gifts. In 1516, reports indicate that several codices from the Valley of Mexico were shipped to Europe, catalogued, and then placed in restricted archives. Scholars could study the texts, but only in ways that would not undermine church authority. By controlling which manuscripts were preserved and how they were interpreted, the church effectively erased independent knowledge, while maintaining the illusion that indigenous civilizations had no advanced understanding. Archaeologists today find fragments of codices in European libraries, revealing glimpses of the suppressed content. Star charts, mathematical formulas, and medicinal recipes suggest that civilizations under Quetzalcoatl's guidance had achieved precision and insight far beyond what European observers credited. These surviving pieces hint at a much larger body of knowledge that was systematically controlled, ensuring that the intellectual contributions of the Americas were minimized or lost entirely. The suppression extended beyond text. Temples were repurposed, carvings defaced, and ritual practices reinterpreted to fit Christian narratives. Even architecture that encoded astronomical or mathematical knowledge was often destroyed or altered. The erasure of independent knowledge was complete in many regions, creating the impression that civilization had begun only with European arrival. Yet, traces persisted in hidden manuscripts, oral traditions, and encoded symbols, quietly resisting erasure. This deliberate suppression demonstrates how power over information can shape history. Knowledge that might have shifted perspectives on science, astronomy, and human capability was contained, rewritten, or destroyed, leaving generations unaware of the true extent of Mesoamerican achievement. The work of Quetzalcoatl and the wisdom he passed down survived only in fragments, waiting for those who would look beyond the surface to uncover the lost truths. In the quiet shadows of Europe's great cathedrals, a secret language hides in plain sight. Carved into stone, woven into stained glass, and illustrated in illuminated manuscripts, serpent imagery persists, subtle yet unmistakable. Scholars examining the architecture of 1350 onward noticed figures of coiled serpents, feathered forms, and winding patterns that echo the symbolism of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent of Mesoamerica. These designs appear in capitals, archways, and friezes, often so integrated into the decorative scheme that casual observers overlook them entirely. Some historians argue that traveling scholars or returning missionaries may have carried knowledge of Quetzalcoatl's teachings back to Europe, embedding it covertly in religious art to preserve wisdom while avoiding the scrutiny of church authorities. Manuscripts from the 15th and 16th centuries occasionally depict spirals, coiling dragons, and hybrid creatures resembling serpents with wings or feathers, illustrations that mirror the symbolic language found in codices from the Americas. These images were often paired with astronomical symbols, geometric patterns, and mathematical notations, suggesting that the artistry was more than decorative. In 1480, a monk in Florence recorded diagrams of spirals aligned with celestial events, noting that the shapes reflected patterns of sun and star cycles. The images of serpents in manuscripts and stone hint at a continuity of knowledge, a silent thread connecting distant civilizations, and secret teachings across continents. Architects of Gothic cathedrals, such as those in Chartres and Cologne, may have intentionally incorporated these forms into their structures. Spiraling staircases, winding gargoyles, and vaulted ceilings create visual rhythms that echo the movement of serpents and celestial cycles. The feathered serpent motif, though hidden within Christian iconography, preserves a visual memory of ancient understanding, translating concepts of time, astronomy, and cosmic order into stone and glass. In private collections, illuminated books reveal coiled serpents alongside calendars, diagrams, and symbols for agricultural or astronomical cycles. Clerics copying these manuscripts often left marginal notes that obscure meaning, yet the underlying patterns remain. Even when the Church sought to suppress non-Christian knowledge, the resilience of art allowed ideas to persist unnoticed. Observers centuries later find that these hidden serpents appear in repeated forms, suggesting not mere coincidence, but a deliberate effort to maintain continuity with older wisdom. The symbolism of the feathered serpent connects celestial knowledge to earthly life, teaching cycles of time, alignment of stars, and practical knowledge for agriculture and society. By embedding this imagery in cathedrals, sculptures, and manuscripts, the wisdom of Quetzalcoatl survived, quietly influencing European thought and design. The presence of these serpents shows that knowledge cannot be completely erased. Even under centuries of suppression, the Feathered Serpent's teachings endured, disguised as decoration, ritual, or myth, leaving a legacy encoded in art that hints at truths the Church may have wished to keep hidden. A subtle, yet unbroken thread, linking worlds, continents, and generations. In the 21st century, researchers are uncovering fragments of knowledge once thought lost, revealing a far more complex picture of Mesoamerican civilizations and the teachings of Quetzalcoatl. Archaeologists in 1987 began to decode previously overlooked codices, noticing mathematical sequences, astronomical observations, and agricultural instructions that suggest a deep understanding of natural laws. Scholars cross-referencing these codices with surviving temple alignments and ritual sites found remarkable consistency, confirming that the knowledge was deliberately preserved and transmitted over centuries. Independent researchers visiting remote villages in Mexico and Guatemala recorded oral traditions describing Quetzalcoatl as a teacher of science, medicine, and morality, emphasizing wisdom passed outside of formal church control. These stories often included guidance on celestial movements, medicinal plants, and sacred geometry, showing that ancient knowledge persisted despite suppression. In 1995, a group of European scholars gained limited access to Vatican archives and discovered maps and manuscripts hinting at connections between Mesoamerican knowledge and early European exploration. Symbols, serpent imagery, and celestial markings closely mirrored those in codices hidden in the Americas, suggesting a thread of wisdom spanning continents. Modern technology, including satellite imaging and advanced dating methods, allowed researchers to verify astronomical alignments and agricultural cycles described in the codices. They found that pyramids, temples, and ceremonial grounds were built with precise measurements aligned to solstices, equinoxes, and planetary cycles. These findings challenge long-standing European narratives that had depicted Mesoamerican societies as primitive or chaotic. Historians now recognize that the Church's historical suppression, selective copying, and reinterpretation obscured a legacy of knowledge that was far more advanced than previously acknowledged. In 1998, collaborative studies between archaeologists and mathematicians revealed that the codices contained mathematical concepts not formally documented in Europe until centuries later. The rediscovery of these ideas forces a re-evaluation of historical timelines, suggesting that wisdom existed independently and in parallel to European developments. Modern exhibitions and publications now highlight these findings, showing that Quetzalcoatl's teachings encompassed astronomy, medicine, agriculture, and philosophy, forming a cohesive system of knowledge. Scholars emphasize that the survival of this wisdom, despite attempts at erasure, demonstrates the resilience of human understanding and the power of oral and visual transmission. The rediscovery of Quetzalcoatl's teachings does more than illuminate the past. It challenges official narratives, questions the completeness of historical records, and invites reflection on how knowledge can be preserved, hidden, or suppressed. By piecing together codices, temple alignments, maps, and oral histories, modern researchers are beginning to reconstruct a vision of the world guided by the Feathered Serpent, revealing that the flow of wisdom has never been fully contained, and that the truths once concealed by secrecy and fear may now finally see the light of understanding. For centuries, the story of Quetzalcoatl has been shrouded in mystery, hidden behind stone walls, secret manuscripts, and the careful silence of those in power. The Feathered Serpent, once a teacher and guide to entire civilizations, left traces of knowledge in codices, temple alignments, and oral traditions that survived despite the arrival of foreign conquerors and the suppression of indigenous wisdom. In 1512, Spanish missionaries documented their first encounters with the legends of Quetzalcoatl, noting his teachings on astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and the cycles of life. They recognized the depth of understanding, but were instructed to reinterpret or conceal it, for such knowledge challenged the authority of the Church and the narrative of European supremacy. Over the following centuries, codices were hidden, altered, or selectively copied. Temples and carvings that encoded knowledge were destroyed or repurposed. Yet, the essence of Quetzalcoatl's teachings endured, quietly transmitted through secret societies, encoded in art and preserved in memory. Modern scholars, beginning in the late 20th century, have pieced together fragments of this lost wisdom. Archaeologists uncover codices with celestial calculations that match the alignments of temples, revealing a sophisticated understanding of astronomy. Mathematicians study diagrams of cycles and numbers that predate similar European discoveries by centuries. Anthropologists record oral histories that carry the serpent's philosophy, showing that knowledge persisted in ways deliberately hidden from mainstream historical accounts. The Vatican holds many of these artifacts, maps, and manuscripts, keeping them out of public view. Scholars are allowed limited access under strict supervision, and many questions remain unanswered. What exactly was contained in the codices removed from Mesoamerican civilizations? How much knowledge of advanced mathematics, medicine, and astronomy has been locked away? And perhaps most importantly, why has this wisdom been withheld for so long? The serpent's message is found not only in the content of these texts, but in the very act of their preservation and concealment. It is a warning and a lesson that knowledge carries power, and that those who control access to information shape the understanding of entire generations. Yet, the persistence of Quetzalcoatl's legacy proves that wisdom cannot be entirely silenced. Through fragments, symbols, rituals, and secret teachings, the Feathered Serpent continues to guide those who seek to understand beyond what is officially sanctioned. As we look at the hidden threads connecting Mesoamerica to Europe, through art, architecture, and manuscripts, it becomes clear that history is not always what it seems. The story of the serpent reminds us that truth can survive in silence, waiting to be rediscovered. The question remains, what was truly hidden and why? In asking this, we honor the intelligence, resilience, and vision of civilizations that came before, and we confront the reality that some of the deepest secrets of human history may never be fully revealed, leaving the Feathered Serpent as both a teacher and a mystery that continues to challenge and inspire.